Welcome to Civics in a Year, the podcast that makes civic literacy fast, accessible, and surprisingly engaging. In just 10 minutes an episode, we'll tackle one of 250 essential questions about American democracy, how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to better understand your country and your rights, you're in the right place. Civics in a Year is powered by the Civic Literacy Curriculum from the Center for American Civics and is produced in partnership with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. Welcome back. I am stoked because we have a librarian from my favorite library in America. And we can get into arguments later, but today's guest is Samantha Snyder. She is a research librarian at the George Washington Presidential Library at Mount Vernon. She supports scholars, engages the public, and helps uncover the archival stories that shape our understanding of early America. I am fangirling and geeking out because I'm excited to bring this fresh insight to Washington's farewell address, its lasting civic significance, and I was telling Samantha at the beginning of this, I attended a teacher institute at George Washington's Mount Vernon in 2017. So in the universe, Samantha and I have definitely met. And it was an incredibly impactful week. But I was scrolling back through my Instagram and I saw the post from the day we went to the library. And I cried because this library is so incredible. So Samantha, the first question I want to ask, when we talk about presidential libraries, right, people think like, oh, Ronald Reagan's, Richard Nixon's, LBJ, like you go and it's more of a museum. But this presidential library is not that. Can you give us a little insight into Washington's presidential library?
Sure. And thank you again for having me, Liz. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm excited to have someone who loves libraries so much and librarians. I feel very honored. So I work at the George Washington Presidential Library, and we recently had a name change. So now it sounds even more like we're under that branch, the National Archives with all the traditional libraries, presidential libraries. But here at Mount Vernon, we really try to be not only a library, but a real center for scholarship, for outreach, for programs, for teachers. Like the neat thing is that we take all of that knowledge that we have here and share it with the public. So that's something that's really fun and something I didn't necessarily expect. Like I didn't realize when I started here as a librarian, I would be giving tours, I would be listening to leadership institutes, like seeing all these things like from start to finish is so special. Like so I guess that's where we're different. We don't have a museum. We don't have all of George Washington's papers either. So that's where we really supplement with these different public programs and things like that. So we're more than just, a librarian at a front desk, like sitting there typing and that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's just, again, I love librarians. Before this, we were talking about I love libraries. I just think they are the backbone to our civic culture. So today we're talking about Washington's farewell address. And every time I hear this, all I can hear in my head is Christopher Jackson singing One Last Time from Hamilton.
100%, 1,000%.
Yes, because, they pull pieces from Washington's farewell address. And I'm so glad a new generation of people are getting to know Washington as opposed to just being like, well, he was the first president and moving on. I mean, he was so impactful. So from your work with this Washington era archives and print culture, how should we understand the farewell address as a document meant to be read rather than spoken and delivered? And what does that choice reveal about Washington's relationship with the public?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think one thing I found with working at the library is reading so much of his correspondence already. So a lot of Washington that survives in general is the written word. But I think what's really interesting about the farewell address specifically is how he chose to print it in the newspaper. So in his way, that was sharing it with the broader public as fast as he could, and even before he spoke with Congress about it. And I think the idea of it being written helped to share it because there weren't many people who were in George Washington's immediate circle who were having these types of conversations with him in advance. So you wouldn't necessarily, and they didn't have how we think of like these big presidential addresses now, like the State
Mhm.
of the Union. Now we, broadcast that to the public, but then that was only internal for Congress. And like this sort of thing, I think that's why it's important to think about it being read. However, I do think it's interesting that we have read it out loud now every year since, I mean, 1862, and then they skipped ahead. So it's like we as a culture where so much is spoken now rather than just written have adapted it to that because it was never really meant to be read out loud. And you kind of see that with like the sort of lengthy phrases and different
Mhm.
things like that, and kind of it doesn't necessarily read stream of consciousness, but it's definitely an interesting just yeah. So
And I'm glad that you put us there, right? Is that these George Washington's not like getting on the radio or getting on TV.
mm-mm, mm-mm,
All of his correspondence is meant to be read. And it
mm-hmm,
is, when you look at the document, I like that you said stream of conscience. It's not something that is easily readable out loud, but when you read
mm-mm.
it just to yourself, that's where it makes the most sense.
Yeah,
So, given your research of the political networks around
yeah,
Washington, especially the ladies like Elizabeth Willing Powell,
yeah.
how much of the farewell address do you think reflects Washington's own voice versus the influence of his circle of people that you mentioned in these advisors?
Yeah, yeah. I should have said too. I mean, if this you can add in as an aside. So my research on Elizabeth Powell has actually, I have just gotten a publication date for my book. So it'll be the spring of 2027.
Okay.
And it's with the University of Virginia Press. So as of Friday, it was accepted by the board officially. So
Congratulations.
yeah. So that's a new, very exciting thing. I have a tentative title at the moment, but nothing so firm. So if it's
Mhm.
just biography. That's just a biography of Elizabeth Powell. It's just what I've been calling. Not that's not the title, but I don't have
Yes.
one that's public enough yet. But anyway,
Yeah.
so yes. So to go back, so my research. So I guess the question was in looking at the networks of
Hmm.
Washington, like the network around Washington, how much of the words seem like their words versus his words? That that is a good question. I think there is always going to be a bit of both in there, like his own thoughts versus theirs. I thought it was interesting at the beginning how he brought up that I think it's near the beginning where he brings up the fact that he was set to retire. Like he was so close to considering, like, I'm done. But then the unanimous voice of the people who had his full confidence made him decide to continue. And so you can see at the very least these words, even if they are specifically his own, the opinions of others really did greatly affect him and they helped guide him, that sort of stuff, for better or for worse. I think
Hmm.
he was more self-conscious sometimes and I think he let on. But you do see sort of the arguments of like you could see some of the sentiments of Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton and Madison when he brings up the neutrality crisis, like different things like that. But I do find that sentiment right at the beginning very interesting that he admits it and acknowledges that it was not him alone that made that choice to serve another term, but it was his choice to step down. He does not say, and my friends said, it's time to step down. Like, so it's like that in and of itself, I suppose, is his own choice
Hmm.
and sentiment. So, yeah,
I every time I read the farewell address, I just think about everything he did for this like new nation and whether it was his military leadership, his presidential leadership, and every time I go to Mount Vernon, my favorite thing to do is to sit out back and look at the Potomac because I just think of him and think
hmm
of he just wanted to hang out here and he
hmm
ended up you know really setting the standard. And when you talk about him listening to people for better or for worse, I think that's a civic virtue I really appreciate about him is that humility and is the understanding of like, I did not go to a college like all of these other people. I still am
yeah,
smart in my ways, but I want to bring in these people. And what an interesting reflection in the farewell address to think about all of these people who influenced him and who probably
Definitely.
helped write parts of it.
Exactly, exactly. And I find that so interesting too, because we all kind of think of Washington. You forget sometimes that he had people behind him helping him.
Mhm.
I mean, he had the whole cabinet, and we have presidential cabinets now, of course, but like that's one thing I really admire about him as well is his ability to seek the guidance of others and to understand where he has his limits. And so I think to a point, sometimes I think his writing, even in his speech, like, I mean,
Mhm.
I think some of that he wanted the help of these men who had been classically educated. However, I do see this is just going back to, I guess, your other question. I see less formalities than I would think if Hamilton had written the entire thing or something like that. Because
Yes.
you see some of these men have these very eloquent, grandiose thoughts and yeah,
Long-winded.
long-winded. Like I would say his farewell address does not necessarily read like the Federalist Papers or something like that. However,
It
those are
sure
two
doesn't.
very different, types of pieces to write, but still, I think it's interesting.
I mean, it is interesting to compare the two because even with the Federalist Papers, it was always a joke in my classroom because there were times where, I just wouldn't tell students who wrote it, but they would always figure it out.
Yeah.
James Madison is a very much a teacher, like how he
Hmm.
talks, and Alexander Hamilton just doesn't understand why you don't understand what he's saying. And
Exactly.
it's so interesting now that you talk about Washington and how he wrote to just I just love that these archives exist,
Me
that
too.
that's how we learn about them, right? Like
Absolutely.
that is the data, if you will, that's left over. We don't have
Mhm.
photos and we don't have, pictures and things like that. I mean, there's paintings and there's
Yeah, yeah.
incredible paintings of Washington, but it is,
But those words, like
yes.
seeing it in his handwriting, and that's something, I feel so blessed at Mount Vernon to get to
Mhm.
do every day. Like, and you really do. I feel like letters and addresses and things like that, they're such a they're the most human part of people because I feel like handwriting is kind of
Yes.
like your most unique, like personal thing is handwriting. So, and now granted, we all learned how to write similarly, and he's
Mhm.
same thing, but like to see some of those letters and think of him, just the jokes he makes, all that sort of stuff is always very fun too. So that's what I've always liked about Washington the most. It's the human Washington, the flawed
Yes,
Washington. So yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
So I have a question that's off script talking about
yeah, yeah,
letters.
yeah.
So Martha Washington burned a lot of letters after he passed.
Yeah.
Why was that a thing? Right? It's not like she did it out of anger or whatever else. That was actually a common practice,
Hmm.
correct?
hmm hmm I think yes. So Martha Washington, before she died, ordered their letters to be burned, and it was a common practice. However, I also think when you think about it, all these words, like George Washington's letters were being published during his lifetime. So these addresses are meant to be published, but his war correspondence is being published. Like there's pamphlets of like his circular letters, different things like that. Like nothing was private for him, and I think he knew that people were soliciting him to use his papers for their books. Like there's this man William Gordon who wrote this history of the Revolutionary War. He started soliciting him during the war for use
Oh,
of his
wow.
papers. So it's like I think George and Martha knew that their correspondence was going to be the most, intimate of all. The Washington who was now, I mean, I say intimate, like I mean, like
Hmm.
just the more, day-to-day things,
Yeah.
like his fears, I mean, that sort of thing. Like so of course they wanted to preserve them for each other. Now
Yeah.
I'm glad we have John and Abigail Adams's letters though.
Yes.
I love those. I love John Adams. I think he's hilarious. But yeah.
I will tell you, I was never a John Adams fan
Yeah.
until recently. Your Lindsay Chervinsky wrote
Mhm.
the book on John Adams, and I
Yeah.
met her at NCSS, and I was like, well, I guess I have to read this. And we did a series in Civics in a Year on the women of the founding,
Oh
and
yeah.
one of the episodes was on John and Abigail Adams. And
Mhm.
that in itself, too, just these figures and their
I
writing and
know.
how it just is.
Well,
Again,
like
I
with,
feel like
I
I could
mean,
talk to you for
I
hours about
know, and I'm
this
going
because
on
it's so
some too,
fascinating.
but like Elizabeth Powell is a good example of a woman who, I
Yes.
mean, yeah, and we have, I mean, that's how I see. I have known George Washington, at Mount Vernon. I came across her letter basically within a month of starting at Mount Vernon. So I've known her alongside George Washington as a political influencer for like almost 10 years, well, 9 years, almost 9 years
Yeah.
now. Like I started in January of 2017. So it's just crazy to think of these women behind the scenes in their own right. But we have that incredible letter where the first term she is saying like, do not step down. Like you need to continue. And he does. And I actually was thinking today how cool that is that she was one of those people he's talking about in the farewell address. Like, here's this woman, and I'm sure Martha Washington, of course, is included, but to think of all those people in his head that he was thinking about, she was very much included. So it's just very special. But yeah.
Yeah.
So
So the farewell address has been used, it's been taught, it's been interpreted in
Mhm,
different ways for more than 2 centuries. From a
mhm.
historian's perspective, what parts of Washington's message do you think Americans most overlook or understand today?
I was thinking about that. Like I tried to write down a couple of things. I I think one thing that not misinterpret or forget. I think what one thing they forget is Washington apologizing, like and saying he hopes that they can forgive him for any of his mistakes and flaws. I think we forget sometimes in modern day that, and they did too then, that our political figures are human beings. And so a lot of the idea of like the sort of holding all of these people up on pedestals, and if one thing goes wrong, then they're out and that sort of stuff. Like I think that's something that's really interesting is to remember about the idea of someone apologizing and the humility. I think that
Mhm.
some of the humility today is not so much there. And then I think also, oh God, I don't know. I was trying to think of more. So this is me going I like a little bit.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I don't think I think I wish more people read it. And that's another
Yes.
real thing. So, but
Maybe that can be our call to action for President's Day this
yeah,
year to
yeah,
read
read it.
Washington's farewell address,
Yeah.
because even and listen to One Last Time by
And
Christopher
listen to one
Jackson
last
out of
time. I
Hamilton.
mean, honestly, like, yeah, and I love that that's what Lin-Manuel Miranda pulled from Hamilton
Yes.
is that part. So it's like I guess that's on my brain, but like I think a lot of it is so just like heavy throughout, but that
Mhm.
apologizing and the humility really is what gets me, and I think what people don't necessarily read as they should. So,
Well, and that's the line in the song, because I remember when that first came out, my kids were so excited and it was so fun to have a musical
yeah,
to like bring this
yeah.
to life. And that piece where he says, I shall always carry with me the hope that my country will never cease to view them, all of these things. And it is like an acknowledgement of his humanness. And
Hmm.
I feel like when I read this, it is him saying, here's what I've learned, but also I am a flawed individual and I should
Hmm.
not be this, you
Hmm.
know, God that
Hmm.
you put up on a pedestal. You should learn from what I've done well and what I have messed up on,
Hmm.
but also knowing that I did the best that I could and I did what I felt was right at the time. And that
Hmm.
I don't know that I see that in any other president after him. And
No.
that's not a political stance.
No,
That is just
exactly, exactly.
it is just that. It
Human, I mean,
is
yeah,
maybe Jimmy Carter.
yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe like yeah, like it's a level of self-awareness that I think we
Yes.
forget. And I think what people forget too about the farewell address and about Washington's presidency in general, this was truly the first time this had ever been done. And I think another thing
Yes.
that I kind of it's sort of buried in it, but the idea that he's saying like we are unified because we just won this war. Like we think of the Revolutionary War as being, it's 200 years ago, but when you really like step back and think about it, how new all of this was. Like a whole country had just been formed. All the people who were reading this or having this read to them were remembering that in that moment. Like, and I think I find it interesting that it was used, at the in the beginning of the or in the midst of the Civil War as sort of a way of like soothing people's minds and so a different sort of war. And then, I was thinking too about like the whole idea of the precedent of of like two terms, how it
Hmm.
took until Franklin Roosevelt, who was in a similar situation of Washington, a war, kind of this figure that was, like beloved by some and not by others, but kept going
Yes.
because people needed him. And I think Washington tried to stop that. And I don't know. It's just very interesting. So those are all things I have thought about. But
Well, and again, I'm thinking about my time at Mount Vernon, and I've been probably 6 or 7 times. It's my favorite. I love Washington, D.C., but my favorite thing to do, honestly, is just go to Mount Vernon because
oh,
I feel like I learn something new every time I'm there, or I
hmm
see something new. And you talk about him being self-conscious and him. So he was self-conscious because he did understand. Like Washington was not this figure that everybody was like, he is wonderful, he is loved.
hmm
There were, and again, when last time or when I was at Mount Vernon in the summer, we saw some of that. And we saw, people, you know, drawing these political cartoons or their writings. And that it seemed to me that that actually really affected him,
yeah,
that
yeah,
people were not happy with the job he was doing. So I think that that just adds to the humanness of him, right?
yeah,
And he's not
yeah.
this perfect first president,
Mm-mm,
but that
mm-mm.
makes you love him even more almost.
Yeah, 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 I agree. And I do think that's interesting. And I think that's something we have to remember to think about and to think about both then and now. Like every person who is serving in this role is trying to do their best. People over the years in
Hmm.
serving in this role have tried to do their best and done to the best of their capabilities. And I just think it's an incredible position. I mean, it's like hard to fathom sometimes and hard to fathom it all starting with Washington, like how truly they did not know what was going to come next. But how even then some were ready for him to go, some were not like, but yeah, I think Elizabeth Powell would have been plenty happy for him to have just served in perpetuity. There's a letter, and I write about this in my book,
Hmm.
that I'm pretty sure is when she found out from him that because he was telling people that he was going to step down or was like happily
Yeah.
considering it. She writes a very snarky letter that's like, I have given it some thought and I will have dinner with you tomorrow because I can't let myself just be too mad, basically, and like I will listen to your ideas. What is she? I will listen to your ideas with fortitude or something like that. And I have it just based on timing. I'm like, ooh, I think that's when he might have told her that it was like she's like, you can come for dinner tomorrow and we can talk further. Like, ooh, but so,
That and
yeah.
I think too, one of the things I didn't learn as a student was the impact of women. And that's
Mhm.
kind of why we did a series with Dr. Kirsten Berghag. And I feel like now you're gonna have to come back on the podcast because
Absolutely.
we're gonna have a series of what we call forgotten founders and
Oh,
people that made
yeah.
a difference in the founding, but they're not the people that we learn about. And you know, going through high school and college, I didn't get to learn too much about the way I learned about Martha Washington and Abigail
Mhm.
Adams, but I
Mhm.
learned about them as the wives of, not
Mhm.
necessarily the impactful people who helped shape our nation. And,
Mhm.
you talk about Elizabeth Powell. I'm like, I think I've heard that name,
I
but I
know.
don't know enough. And
I
now I'm
know.
like, spring
I
2027 can't
know.
come fast enough because these are the things that people eat up because
Yeah.
there was this. And the fact that George Washington had these women around him that he
Mhm.
trusted and that he took in their counsel and their advice, I think really speaks to him as a person as a whole, because
Absolutely.
that it didn't seem to me to be the norm back
No,
then.
no. And I think these women, like some of them, it was helpful when they were the wife of someone because
Hmm.
that gave them sort of
Absolutely.
a platform. But it did take the right man to listen. Like, and some of these men, there's an anecdote that's going way off, but there's
Hmm.
a Thomas Jefferson with a woman named Anne Willing Bingham, who was a Philadelphian. She was really the first one who she was Elizabeth Howe's niece, really brought in like French salons and very fancy, very opulent. But she was pretty politically charged and had learned a lot from her aunt. And Thomas Jefferson is real, just like dismissive of her and her political thoughts. And she writes a great letter back. And then, but it's interesting to see how women fought back too, how they didn't
Hmm.
just sit there. I mean, you think of Remember the Ladies with
Yes.
Abigail Adams and
Hmm.
but there's so many women there that even like I'm lucky that Elizabeth Powell, the reason why I'm able to write about her is she copied most of a lot of her letters. So I have her letters thanks to her desire to copy them. And so that helps. But a lot of these women, their correspondence doesn't survive. So you think about who all is there that we don't even know about. But yeah, so
I
so,
just got the
I
chills.
don't know. I
So
don't
I have one last question.
Yes, yes.
So looking ahead, we're coming up on America 250, which is such a great time to look back and to review, the things we really love about our country and the things that we want to continue that charge to more perfect. What do you think that the average American can gain from Washington as a figure to kind of to take in with America 250?
That's a great question. I think I think what Americans can take in, like even thinking back to fit like with the war even
Hmm.
is to be, and I think this is something Washington did his whole life. I think we need to be as Americans be inquisitive and like look at the world around us, look at it in different ways, talk to different people, get different perspectives, and then stand firm in your opinion. Like you deserve to have your opinion, but yeah, just listen to others. The inquisitiveness, I think sometimes with how fast news is, how social media, all of that, we all just kind of get in this sort of tunnel or it just clicks by so fast. But like step back and be inquisitive about what interests you and excites you. I think is something that Washington did, especially when he was a young man. And then I also think humility too. Like I think
Hmm.
we just need to remember we are not perfect. Our leaders are not perfect. Our teachers, our parents, everybody. No one is
Hmm.
perfect. Washington was not perfect, but we are trying our best. And I think we need to continue to become more perfect through humility and being inquisitive. So,
I I love that. And I know that the library has a website. I will put that in the show notes.
yeah.
If somebody is coming to Mount Vernon, I mean, I think they should stop by the library, but
It's
you guys have
hard because
events,
so we're
it's
not so we
kind of far
have
back.
it is far back, and so we're like weirdly not open to the public because of
Okay.
like for research, since we aren't
Yes.
a museum, like our museum is across the street.
It's Mount
However,
Vernon.
we host a lot, if they're local, we host a lot of lunchtime programs. We host free evening events, which are more often than not streamed. So, and they're a lot are free. So you can come and sometimes they're at the library, sometimes they're across the street, but you'll get a chance to listen to scholars and different political figures, public figures talking about not only George Washington, but like we've really been doing a lot more like kind of modern politics and historical politics combining. Like it's just yeah. So definitely visit the museum, or the mansion has now just
Yes.
reopened too. And we
Oh,
will be
I
having
love
the
that.
education center reopening in March. So that is
Yay.
very exciting. So
Oh,
yeah. Yeah.
Samantha, well, I'm not going to say goodbye because you're coming back on so that we can talk
Yeah,
about
exactly. Yeah,
Elizabeth Powell.
keep me in mind.
But I appreciate your work as a historian and as a librarian because I think that, especially with students, when they think of librarian, they think of like their school librarian. And I am a huge proponent of school librarian. Shout out to Mary Knutson, who is my librarian at South Valley Junior High. And she was the best
You're
person
right.
to ask questions. I would go in, I'd say, Mary, my kids are researching this. She's like, bring them in, I can help. And to have a librarian finally on our podcast, especially to, a historian. And I want people who are listening to this, especially kids, if you love history and you love, like, these are jobs. You can work at these cool places.
Absolutely.
This is a job.
Listen to me, kids. You can. And I do have to give a shout out to my elementary school librarian, Pat Wendy. She was at Royal Oaks Elementary, but she gave me my first library job. And but yeah, so all these ways. It's like, it's funny how you can remember your librarians' names. Like, but yes, you can work this job, and you can work in a school library, you can work at a college, you can work all sorts of different places. But I did get very lucky here. Like,
yes, librarians rock is really what we're trying to say.
Yes, we do. And so do teachers.
Yes, 1,000%. And the combination of the two is absolutely unstoppable. Yes. Samantha, thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're very welcome.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Civics in a Year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who cares about a constitutional republic as much as you do. For more episodes, resources, and updates, follow us on social media or visit us at civics.asu.edu. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Special thanks to the United States Marine Band for their performance of the Stars and Stripes Forever. Let's keep building a stronger constitutional republic, one episode at a time.